I never thought the day would come when my own daughter would look at me with eyes filled not with love, but with something far colder contempt. After 4 decades of dedicating my life to caring for others as a head nurse at Boston Memorial, I never imagined I'd find myself crawling across my bedroom floor, gripping the edge of the nightstand, pain radiating through my leg with every movement, and realizing for the first time that the people I loved the most might not love me back. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about family and betrayal. It's about boundaries, survival, and reclaiming the life you thought was lost. That night, the house was quiet, except for the pounding of my heart and the shallow rasp of my breath as I dragged myself toward the bathroom door. I had called out for 20 minutes, my voice hoarse and weak, knowing Samantha and Ryan were just downstairs. But no one came, and then, finally, footsteps. Samantha, my daughter, appeared at the doorway, arms folded, her expression flat, almost impatient. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked, her tone clipped, more annoyed than concerned. I managed to whisper, I need to use the bathroom. My medication." My throat was raw, my body trembling. She sighed dramatically, glancing at her watch. "You know we can't hear you from downstairs, right? Ryan and I have that hospital board dinner in an hour. A dinner I hadn't been told about. A dinner they hadn't mentioned, when they insisted I stay here after my total knee replacement, a surgery I'd postponed for years because I was too busy taking care of everyone else." "I'm sorry," I muttered automatically, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Even at 70 years old, I was apologizing for needing help. Samantha helped me to the bathroom, her movements efficient but cold, her hand pulling away the moment I steadied myself on the sink. I noticed the expensive bracelet on her wrist, a gift from me last Christmas, and the tailored dress she wore, likely purchased with the savings I'd built over a lifetime. It struck me then, hard and unrelenting, just how much of the world around them I had built. The down payment for their house, the tuition for Samantha's medical school, the endless emergency transfers to cover vacations and renovations. As she guided me back toward the bed, Ryan appeared in the doorway, straightening his tie, perfectly composed in his tailored suit. "Everything okay here?" he asked, glancing past me, already half checked out of the room. Samantha didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me, her jaw tight, as though every request, every tiny need of mine was an unbearable burden. And in that moment, something in me cracked, not from pain, but from the realization that love given freely can still be taken for granted, and sometimes by the people you least expect. Ryan's voice cut through the room like a cold draft, clipped and sharp. "Didn't he just take his meds 3 hours ago?" He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Samantha, as though I wasn't sitting right there in front of them. Samantha's tone was equally tight. "It's time for his scheduled dose." I lay back against the pillows, feeling strangely detached, as though I were watching this scene play out from somewhere outside my body. They talked about me as if I were an obligation to be managed, rather than a father recovering from surgery. I forced a small smile and whispered, "I can get it myself," reaching carefully toward the nightstand. My hand trembled, but before I could grab the bottle, Ryan moved quickly, his steps clipped and irritated, grabbing the pill bottle and thrusting it into my hands with a glass of water. "Here," he said flatly, his eyes narrowing as though I were inconveniencing him. My fingers, clumsy and swollen from the swelling, fumbled with the childproof cap. Then it slipped. The bottle hit the hardwood floor with a hollow crack, scattering white pills across the room like spilled pearls. The silence that followed lasted no more than a breath before Ryan exploded. "For God's sake, Andy, are you serious?" His face flushed red as he threw his hands up in frustration. I froze, my chest tightening, an apology already forming on my lips. Samantha rushed back into the room, her heels clicking against the floor. "What happened now?" she demanded. "Your father dropped his pills all over the place," Ryan snapped. "I don't have time for this." My instinct was to bend forward, to gather the scattered pills myself, but the motion sent a sharp, searing pain shooting through my leg, ripping a groan from my throat. "Stop!" Samantha barked, her voice louder than I'd ever heard it. "You'll tear your stitches and end up back in the hospital." I froze, my hands trembling, my cheeks burning with shame. I'm sorry, I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded in my own ears. That was when it happened. That was when everything inside this fragile, temporary peace shattered. Samantha straightened, her face hardening. Do you even understand what we've given up this week, Dad? Her voice rose, sharp and biting. I had to cancel 3 surgeries. Ryan's missed 2 critical meetings. We've rearranged our entire lives to be here for you, and it's never enough. Ryan chimed in, using my first name for the first time in years, his tone dripping with contempt. We're not your nurses, Andy. We're not your servants. The words hit harder than any physical pain. I stared at them, blinking, unsure if I'd heard right. Samantha's face twisted, her frustration boiling over. You spent your whole life taking care of strangers, Dad. You chose the hospital over your own family. And now you expect us to drop everything and play caregiver like we owe you something. We have our own lives. For a long moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my breath shallow. The 2 people I had sacrificed the most for my daughter and her husband were standing in front of me, not as my family, but as accusers. I thought of the years of double shifts, the endless overtime, the way I scraped and saved so Samantha could attend medical school without debt. I thought of the down payment for this very house, the emergency loans that somehow became permanent, the quiet financial rescues they never acknowledged. And now here I was, 70 years old, being spoken to like a burden, like a stranger in the home my money helped build. Something inside me broke then, but not in the way I expected. My tears dried. My hands stopped shaking. The shame that had choked me moments ago began to dissolve, replaced by something colder, steadier. I sat up slowly, ignoring the throb in my knee, and met Samantha's eyes. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. I understand exactly where I stand. She hesitated, caught off guard by my composure. Ryan frowned, crossing his arms defensively. Dad, we're just being honest. We can't keep rearranging our lives like this. I nodded slowly. Good, I said, my voice steady. Honesty is important. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. Samantha's eyes narrowed instantly. What are you doing? She asked, suspicion creeping into her tone. Making 2 very important calls, I replied, sliding my glasses on and unlocking the screen. But don't let me keep you. You have your dinner to get to. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan exhaled loudly, already backing toward the door. We'll be back around 11, he muttered. Samantha lingered for half a heartbeat longer, her expression unreadable, then turned sharply on her heel and followed him out. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence that filled the room felt different this time, heavier, but also somehow lighter. They thought they had delivered their final verdict on me, but what they didn't know was that I had just delivered mine. As I stared at the scattered pills on the floor, a strange sense of clarity settled over me like fresh snowfall. They believed I needed them to survive, but they were wrong. That night, as the sound of their car pulling out of the driveway faded into the distance, I realized something I should have understood years ago. I had been trying to buy love that could never be bought. And tonight, for the first time in decades, I was done paying. I sat there for a long time after the door closed, staring at the scattered pills across the hardwood floor. The house was quiet now, the silence thick and heavy, but inside my chest something had shifted. For 70 years I had been the dependable one, the fixer, the provider, the man who never said no. I had sacrificed my time, my health, and my savings for Samantha and Ryan, believing that love meant never keeping score. But tonight, for the first time, I saw things clearly. They didn't see me as a father. They saw me as an account number. Slowly I reached for my phone, my hand steady now. My reflection in the darkened television screen looked different, older somehow, but sharper, more awake. I took a deep breath and dialed the first number. Mr. Peterson, please, I said when the bank's automated line finally connected me to a human voice. Moments later, his warm, familiar tone came on the line. Mr. Miller, it's been a while. How's retirement treating you? Not as well as I thought, I replied evenly. Listen carefully, Richard. I need all joint accounts with Samantha Miller and Ryan Carter frozen immediately. Remove their access to my personal accounts, too. There was a pause on the other end, the weight of my request sinking in. Mr. Miller, he began cautiously, this is highly unusual. Are you certain? I leaned back against the pillows, letting the words settle between us. I've banked with you for 35 years, Richard. I'm absolutely certain. My voice carried no tremor this time, no hesitation. And one more thing. I want a full accounting of every withdrawal they've made from my accounts over the past 5 years. Every loan, every transfer, every unexplained expense. And cancel the automatic monthly transfers to their checking account. Understood, Mr. Miller, he said finally, his tone shifting to professional precision. We'll have it processed by morning. I hesitated for only a second before asking. And the mortgage on 247 Beacon Street has this month's payment cleared? Another pause. No, sir. That's the third consecutive month it's been late. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Of course. The house they lived in, the one I had helped them buy, wasn't even being paid for. Thank you, Richard, I said quietly. That's all I need tonight. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The second call was harder, though not because I doubted it. When James Porter, my attorney of 20 years, answered on the second ring, his voice was warm with concern. Andy, what's going on? Are you okay? Not really, I admitted, my voice steady but low. I need eviction papers drawn up immediately. They have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Silence. Then a cautious response. That's extreme. Are you sure you don't want to give them more time? I thought of Samantha's glare, Ryan's mocking tone, the pills scattered on the floor, and decades of sacrifices they treated like entitlements. I've already given them more than I should have, I said finally. 48 hours, James. I want the documents delivered by tomorrow morning. I'll make it happen, he said softly, his voice lined with respect rather than hesitation now. When the call ended, I placed the phone on the nightstand and sat very still, staring at the ceiling. The weight of years pressed down on me, but beneath it, something unexpected rose up, a strange, quiet calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken, either. I was awake. That night, I called one more person, someone I hadn't reached out to in years, but who had always been there when it mattered. Mike, I said softly when he answered, his familiar baritone grounding me. I need a place to stay. There was no pause, no hesitation, just a simple reply. I'll come get you. 20 minutes later, Michael Torres stood at the door, his expression shifting from relief to shock as he took in my pale face and swollen leg. Jesus, Andy, he whispered, steadying me as I leaned on my walker. What the hell happened? I met his gaze, tired but resolute. I finally opened my eyes. I said simply. As he helped me gather my things, I felt lighter somehow, as though a door I hadn't realized was locked had finally swung open. By the time we stepped out into the cool Boston night, I knew one thing for certain. The man crawling on that bedroom floor was gone. And the man walking out of this house, painful step by painful step, wasn't coming back. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains at Michael's apartment, but my phone lit up like a storm breaking the horizon. 32 missed calls, 48 unread messages, all from Samantha and Ryan. The first one was mild. Dad, we need to talk. The next, why did the bank freeze our accounts? What's going on? By the 15th, Samantha's tone shifted from confusion to fury. You can't do this to us. We've given up everything to take care of you. And then, a final message from Ryan that stopped me cold. We'll fight this. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned it face down on the table. Michael poured me a cup of coffee, his calm presence grounding me. You expected this, right? He asked gently. I expected some anger, I admitted. What I didn't expect was how quickly they'd go on the offensive. By mid-afternoon, James called. Andy, he said, his voice clipped. Brace yourself. Samantha and Ryan have retained counsel. They're contesting the eviction. I closed my eyes briefly, not surprised. It gets worse, he continued. Their attorney just filed an emergency petition claiming you're mentally incompetent due to heavy pain medication and recent surgery. They're arguing you're being unduly influenced by Michael, by me, maybe even by your doctors. They've contacted your surgeon for your medical records. For a moment I said nothing, the weight of his words settling into my chest like lead. Then slowly I exhaled. They won't get them. Correct, James replied firmly. HIPAA protects your privacy. But, Andy, this isn't just about money anymore. They're trying to take control of your decisions. Financial, medical, everything. I set my coffee down, hands steady. a strange calm coursing through me. Then we fight back. An hour later, the phone rang again, this time Caroline Brooks, an old colleague from Boston Memorial. "Andy," she said urgently, "your daughter was here at the rehab facility asking questions about available rooms for you. She's telling staff you're confused, showing signs of cognitive decline, that you can't live independently anymore." My stomach clenched. "They're trying to have me committed," I whispered. Caroline's voice sharpened. "Exactly. And once you're there, they could petition for temporary guardianship. I've already spoken to the admissions team. We won't process anything without your direct consent." "Thank you, Caroline," I said softly, the gratitude genuine but edged with exhaustion. The assault was coordinated, relentless. Within hours, I received calls from my primary care doctor, my pharmacist, even the director of nursing at Boston Memorial, all reaching out to verify concerns raised by my worried daughter. Samantha's campaign was working its way through every corner of my life, like water seeping into cracks I hadn't realized were there. By dusk, the situation escalated. Michael peeked through his apartment's peephole and stiffened. "They're here," he muttered. I limped carefully to the door, my walker steady beneath me. Through the narrow chain gap, I saw Samantha standing rigid, her expression hard, Ryan just behind her, and two uniformed paramedics waiting awkwardly in the hall. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "What's this?" I asked. Samantha's tone was clipped, almost rehearsed. "Dad, we've been worried. We called for a wellness check. The paramedics are here to take you to a facility where you can get proper care." Michael stepped between us, his voice cool but firm. "Andrew's not going anywhere, Samantha. He's competent, alert, and making his own decisions." Her jaw clenched, frustration flashing in her eyes. "You're interfering with his medical care, Michael. That's elder abuse." That was when I stepped forward, unlocking the chain and opening the door fully. I stood tall, dressed neatly, my surgical scar hidden but my mind sharp and steady. The paramedics looked uncertain now, glancing between us, clearly aware of the tension. "Gentlemen," I said, my tone calm but commanding, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm alert, oriented, and perfectly capable of making my own choices." One of them hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Sir, if you're refusing transport, we can't force you unless a doctor certifies you're incapable." Samantha's voice cracked slightly, frustration laced with desperation. "Dad, please, you're not thinking clearly. You've let Michael and James poison you against us." I met her gaze, unwavering. "The only thing poisoning me," I said quietly, "is the realization that I raised a daughter who sees me as a bank account instead of a father." Before she could reply, a familiar voice came from behind them. "That won't be necessary," James Porter said, stepping into the hallway, a folder in his hand. "I have documents from an independent psychiatrist who assessed Mr. Miller this morning. He is fully competent. Any further attempts to claim otherwise will be treated as harassment." Samantha's expression faltered, and Ryan's hand tightened on her shoulder, his mask of confidence cracking. The paramedics glanced at each other, then quietly excused themselves, leaving only the four of us in the tense silence of the hallway. Samantha's anger reignited like dry tinder. "You had no right to freeze our accounts," she spat, her voice shaking. "I didn't raise mine." "I had every right," I said simply. "And for the record, Samantha, no one promised you unlimited access to my life savings." Her breath hitched, tears gathering in her eyes, but I recognized the shift instantly. It wasn't remorse. It was panic. "After everything I've done for you," she whispered, her voice quivering, "I'm your daughter." The plea hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out anyway. "I'll always love you," I said softly. "But love without respect isn't love, it's dependency. And I won't feed it anymore." Ryan finally stepped forward, his voice low but venomous. "You'll regret this." I stared at him for a long moment, the weight of decades pressing behind my calm. "I've regretted many things in my life," I said, my voice firm, unshaken. "Standing up for myself won't be one of them." Without another word, I closed the door and locked it. Inside, I leaned heavily on my walker, the silence ringing louder than their shouts ever could. My hands trembled not from fear, but from release. For 70 years I had given and given, believing generosity would buy love. Tonight, for the first time, I understood the truth. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. 2 days after the confrontation in Michael's hallway, James arrived at his apartment carrying a leather folder so thick it looked like it contained my entire life. His face was composed, but I could see the steel beneath his calm. "Andy," he said softly as he set the folder on the table, "we need to make some decisions." I nodded, leaning back in the chair, bracing myself. "Samantha and Ryan aren't stopping," he continued. "They've hired a new legal team. They're filing motions to contest the eviction, to unfreeze the accounts, and they're preparing a petition to gain partial control over your assets. We need to move quickly." I felt the sting in my chest, not fear, not yet, but something heavier. "Do it," I said finally, my voice quiet but unwavering. "Whatever we need to do to protect everything." James opened the folder, sliding the first document toward me. "This revokes any previous power of attorney you granted Samantha. She'll no longer have authority over financial or medical decisions." My hand hesitated for only a moment before signing, the pen gliding across the page with a strange, liberating finality. The next document was a healthcare proxy. "You need someone you trust to make decisions if you ever can't," James explained. My gaze drifted toward Michael, who sat across the room, silent but steady as always. "Michael," I said quietly, "would you be willing?" His brows lifted, surprise flickering in his expression. "Of course," he said simply, his voice carrying a weight that steadied me further. I signed again, feeling the chains loosen with every stroke of ink. Then came the will. James rested his hands on the folder, his tone softening. "This is where things get difficult. Samantha and Ryan are your default beneficiaries right now. That should change." I stared at the blank lines where their names would have been, a strange hollowness rising in my chest. For 70 years, I'd believed in the inevitability of bloodlines, that what you earned, you pass down. But what do you do when the people you love most use your generosity as a weapon? I drew a slow, steady breath and spoke. "I want to establish a scholarship fund," I said finally, my voice quiet but certain. "For nursing students, for kids working double shifts trying to climb like I once did. Boston Memorial has a program. I want it fully funded." James nodded, already making notes. "And Ethan," I continued, swallowing hard, "I want a trust set up for him. Enough for college, maybe a down payment someday. But it needs to be untouchable. Samantha and Ryan can't access it." Michael leaned forward slightly, his eyes soft. "That's generous, Andy." I shook my head. "It's not generosity," I said. "It's a promise. To give at least one person in this family a chance to break the cycle." I signed document after document, each stroke of my pen dismantling the future I'd once imagined and replacing it with something new, something earned. By the time we finished, the folder that had once represented a lifetime of entanglement now carried my freedom within it. That evening, as I sat on the balcony overlooking Boston's skyline, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Ethan." His voice was hesitant, layered with confusion. "Grandpa, I don't know what to believe anymore. Mom says you're trying to punish her, that you've cut her off, that you're trying to destroy our family." I closed my eyes, steadying myself before answering. "Ethan, listen to me. This isn't about punishment. This is about respect, something your parents stopped showing a long time ago." Silence stretched on the line. Then he asked softly, "Is it true you kicked them out of the house?" My throat tightened, but I spoke calmly. "I didn't kick them out, Ethan. I reclaimed what's mine. That house exists because I paid for it, and they haven't made a mortgage payment in months despite their salaries. They're doctors, not victims." Another pause. I could almost hear him processing the words. "Mom says you've used money to control her all her life," he murmured. That one landed deep, and I took a long breath before replying. "I helped because I loved her. I gave because I believed that's what family did. But love doesn't mean enabling people who refuse to stand on their own feet. That's not control. It's survival." For the first time, Ethan's voice cracked. I don't want to lose everyone," he whispered. That simple sentence carried the weight of every fracture in this family. "You're not going to lose me," I said firmly. "And the trust I've set up for you," I hesitated, then pushed forward. "It's there to make sure your future isn't determined by their mistakes." There was silence, then a soft, almost shaky, Thank you. After the call, I sat in the quiet, the city humming faintly below. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt steady. Not happy, not at peace, but anchored. Samantha and Ryan would come back harder, I knew that. The legal battles were only beginning. But I also knew this. For the first time, I wasn't playing defense anymore. I wasn't reacting. I was building. When Michael joined me on the balcony, he set down 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to me without a word. I took a slow sip, the warmth cutting through the chill in the night air. "Do you think this will end?" I asked quietly. Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the glowing skyline. "No," he said simply. "Not soon. People don't give up control easily when they've been fed entitlement their whole lives." He paused, turning to meet my eyes. "But I think you've already won, Andy. Not because you froze the accounts or rewrote the will. You won the moment you stopped begging for their love and started valuing your own dignity." I looked out over the city, the glass cool in my hand, and for the first time I believed him. Whatever storm was coming, I was ready. And this time, I wasn't standing alone. 3 weeks later, the storm I'd been expecting finally arrived. James called early that morning, his voice clipped but calm, the way it always was when bad news came. "Andy," he said, "Samantha's lawyers filed a petition for guardianship. They're claiming you're mentally incompetent and incapable of managing your own finances or making medical decisions. There's a hearing scheduled for next Tuesday." I closed my eyes and let the weight of his words sink in. Guardianship, a polite legal term for stripping someone of their autonomy, their independence, their dignity. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the armrest tightly, letting the silence stretch. "We'll fight it," I said finally, my voice low but steady. James hesitated. "We will. But you need to understand they'll come at you hard. They're bringing in doctors, financial statements, witnesses. Their goal is simple: control." I looked out the window of Michael's apartment, the Boston skyline gray under an overcast sky, and something inside me settled. Then we give them a fight they won't forget. By the morning of the hearing, the courthouse buzzed with restrained energy, the marble floors reflecting slivers of pale winter light. I sat at the long oak table beside James, dressed in a dark gray suit Michael insisted I wear, the polished cuffs stiff at my wrists. Across the room, Samantha sat rigidly, Ryan at her side, their attorneys flanking them like soldiers before battle. Samantha's face was composed, but her clenched jaw betrayed the tension beneath the surface. She avoided my gaze, but Ryan didn't. His stare burned with something sharp, almost triumphant, as though he believed this was already won. The judge, a woman with clear gray eyes and an air of controlled authority, began the session. Samantha's attorneys presented first. They painted a meticulous portrait of a frail, confused 70-year-old man recovering from surgery, allegedly making irrational financial decisions under the undue influence of outsiders. They cited my recent withdrawal of funds, the freezing of joint accounts, and the revision of my will as evidence of cognitive instability. They even brought up my decision to move out of Samantha's house, framing it as an impulsive, paranoid act. As I listened, I almost didn't recognize the man they were describing. This wasn't incompetence. I thought bitterly this was clarity they couldn't control. Then came their star witness, a doctor from their hospital, someone Samantha likely convinced to testify. He claimed I had displayed confusion during recovery, citing half-truths twisted into weapons. James leaned in, murmuring quietly, "Don't react. Let them hang themselves." Finally, it was our turn. James stood calmly, his voice measured but unyielding as he dismantled their narrative piece by piece. He introduced my independent psychiatric evaluation from just last week, a clean bill of cognitive health, signed by a respected specialist. He highlighted my decades-long history of managing complex medical environments and financial responsibilities without incident. He reminded the court of my 40 years at Boston Memorial, the lives I'd saved, the teams I'd led. "This is not a man incapable of managing his affairs," James said firmly, his voice carrying through the quiet courtroom. "This is a man who made deliberate, rational choices after enduring prolonged mistreatment from those petitioning against him." And then, unexpectedly, James called one more witness, Ethan. My grandson stepped hesitantly toward the stand, his tall frame tense but resolute, his youthful uncertainty tempered by something deeper. Samantha's head snapped toward him, her lips parting in surprise, but he didn't meet her gaze. James kept his questions simple. "Ethan, you've spoken to your grandfather recently?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." "And in your conversations? Did he seem confused? Disoriented? Incapable of making decisions?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly on the first word, but steadied with the next. Number he was clear. Clearer than I've ever heard him. Samantha shifted in her seat, whispering urgently to her attorney, but Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "He answered every question I had. He explained why he made the choices he did. He didn't sound irrational. He sounded tired. Tired of being taken advantage of." Silence fell over the room for a beat, and I felt my throat tighten. That single sentence landed harder than any argument James could have made. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Samantha's face. When it was over, the judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable, her hands folded neatly before her. "Based on the evidence presented, I see no grounds to grant this petition," she said finally, her voice even but firm. "Mr. Miller is competent and fully capable of managing his personal and financial affairs. Petition denied." The words washed over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Relief didn't come all at once. It trickled in slowly, cautious, like a river thawing after winter. Across the table, Samantha's shoulders sagged, but her eyes still burned. Her jaw clenched tight as Ryan leaned in to whisper something sharp in her ear. I didn't need to hear it to know this wasn't over for them. Outside the courthouse, Ethan caught up to me, his expression guarded but searching. "I didn't do it for sides," he said quickly, almost defensively. I told the truth." I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice low but steady. "That's all I ever wanted, kid. The truth." For a moment, his eyes softened. A faint glimmer of the boy I used to take fishing on weekends when the world felt simpler, before money and resentment twisted everything between us. That night, back at Michael's apartment, I sat quietly by the window, watching the city lights scatter across the Charles River. Victory felt strange, bittersweet, because winning didn't erase the loss. The daughter I once believed would stand beside me had chosen battle over love, control over trust. But somewhere inside the wreckage of this family, there was still Ethan, still a chance to build something honest, something new. As the quiet deepened, I realized this fight had changed me in ways I hadn't yet begun to understand. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece, into someone stronger, someone freer. Samantha and Ryan might come at me again, but the man sitting by that window tonight wasn't the same man crawling on the bedroom floor weeks ago. That man was gone, and I wasn't going back. The days after the hearing passed quietly, though the silence no longer felt heavy with dread. It was a different kind of stillness now. Not the suffocating weight of being trapped, but the tentative peace of someone rebuilding. Michael's apartment became my refuge, its sunlit windows and warm wood floors, an unlikely sanctuary for a 70-year-old man learning, for the first time, how to stand alone. The court's decision had freed me, but freedom is complicated when you've spent a lifetime tying your worth to the people you love. Winning didn't erase the ache of what was lost, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in years: control. I spent the mornings walking along the Charles River, the slow, uneven rhythm of my cane clicking against the pavement. Each step was deliberate, measured, almost meditative. In the afternoons, I met with James to finalize the scholarship fund paperwork. "We'll call it the Andrew Miller Nursing Endowment," he said with a faint smile as he handed me the draft documents. The name felt foreign on my tongue, as though it belonged to someone else entirely, yet seeing it in bold print steadied me. The fund would cover tuition and clinical training for underprivileged students pursuing nursing at Boston Memorial. I thought about my early years, the night shifts, the exhaustion, the relentless climb, and felt something tighten in my chest, not pain, but a deep, quiet pride. I was no longer defined by what I had given away to those who squandered it. Now, I could give to those who might actually build something with it. Evenings often belonged to Ethan. After the hearing, something shifted between us, subtle but profound. He came by Michael's apartment every few days, sometimes staying for dinner, other times just to sit on the balcony and watch the city lights scatter across the skyline. One night, as the warm summer air drifted through, he leaned against the railing, his voice quiet. "You know," he said, "I think Mom's angry at me for testifying." I turned to look at him, his face caught between shadows and light, and chose my words carefully. "I think your mom's angry at the truth, Ethan. That's not the same thing." He nodded slowly, hands shoved into his pockets, his expression tense but thoughtful. As the weeks passed, I began to sense Ethan's quiet rebellion taking shape. He asked me questions his parents would never answer about money, about choices, about forgiveness. One evening, after a long pause, he asked softly, "Do you think families ever really fix things? Like, do we get back to normal after something like this?" I stared out across the Charles, the river glittering faintly under the city lights, and said, "I don't think we go back, Ethan. I think we build something new if everyone's willing. But it won't look like what you remember. It'll be smaller, maybe quieter, and that's okay." It was the first time I saw hope flicker in his expression. 2 weeks later, I moved back into my own apartment. The place that had sat empty for months now felt different, less like a hollow space and more like mine again. Michael helped me set it up, making sure everything I needed was within reach while my knee continued to recover. On the day I returned, Ethan showed up unannounced, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Summer break," he said with a tentative grin. "Thought I might crash here for a few weeks if that's okay." I hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Of course," I said. "Always." Life settled into a new rhythm. I cooked simple meals for us, rediscovered music I'd forgotten I loved, and spent quiet afternoons reviewing applications for the scholarship fund. Ethan would sprawl across the couch with his textbooks, sometimes asking for advice, other times just keeping me company in silence. Slowly, the ache inside me began to soften. And then, on a warm Friday afternoon, the unexpected happened. I was leaving Boston Memorial after a meeting with the scholarship committee when I saw her. Samantha. She stood in the hospital courtyard, white coat draped neatly over her shoulders, her posture poised but her face thinner, sharper than I remembered. For a moment, we both froze, the hum of the city fading around us. Then, slowly, she walked toward me. "Dad," she said softly, her voice careful, controlled. I nodded in greeting, my throat tightening slightly. "Samantha." For a beat, neither of us spoke, as though the weight of everything unsaid hung suspended between us. Finally, she broke the silence. "I heard about the scholarship," she said, her gaze dropping briefly before meeting mine again. "Boston Memorial sent an internal memo. It's generous." Her tone carried something unexpected. Not warmth, exactly, but not venom either. "It's not generosity," I said evenly. "It's purpose." "Oh." She nodded, her fingers twisting together for a moment, betraying a crack in her composure. "I thought I understood you," she whispered finally, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "All these years. I thought I knew why you did what you did. I thought you wanted control." I studied her face, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the exhaustion buried beneath her careful restraint. "Maybe I didn't explain it well," I said softly. "But Samantha, love isn't control, and enabling isn't love. I didn't see the difference for a long time. That's my failure, too." For a fleeting moment, her eyes softened, the steel giving way to something fragile, something almost like grief. Then she looked away, blinking hard, and straightened her shoulders. "I'm not ready to talk," she said finally, her voice steadier now. "Not yet." I nodded once, slowly. "That's okay," I said. "I'll be here when you are." "Oh." She hesitated, as though weighing words she couldn't bring herself to say, then turned and walked away, her footsteps fading into the hum of the courtyard. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle around me, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not closure, not forgiveness, but possibility. That night, Ethan asked what happened, and I told him simply, "We spoke. That's all." He studied me carefully, searching for more, but didn't push. Later, as we sat together on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly ahead, I realized something profound. Sometimes healing doesn't come in sweeping reconciliations or tearful apologies. Sometimes it starts quietly with a conversation, a glance, a willingness to try. And for the first time since this began, I felt the faint but steady pulse of hope. 2 months after the hearing, the city had shifted into late summer, warm winds carrying the scent of salt from the harbor. I stood outside Boston Memorial, staring up at its towering glass facade, feeling an unexpected tightness in my chest. This hospital had been my second home for 4 decades, the place where I'd built my career, saved lives, and quietly sacrificed myself piece by piece. And now, after everything, I was returning, but not as the head nurse I used to be. Today, I was starting over. The patient advocacy department had offered me a part-time position 3 days a week, helping patients navigate the tangled web of insurance, referrals, and post-operative care. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt right. After years of giving until I was empty, I finally had the chance to give with boundaries, to help without disappearing into someone else's needs. Walking through the hospital's main lobby again was like stepping into an old memory. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint hum of busy conversations and the beeping of monitors carried me back through time. Colleagues stopped me in the halls, surprise blooming into warm smiles. "Andy? Back already? We missed you around here," one nurse said, squeezing my arm gently. Another leaned in to whisper, "We heard about everything. The case, the scholarship fund. You've inspired a lot of people." I nodded, humbled but quiet. The first few weeks flew by. The work challenged me, but it grounded me too, pulling me back into something familiar yet transformed. Even Ethan noticed. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, the last orange glow of daylight painting the skyline, he said softly, "You seem lighter, Grandpa." Happier. I smiled faintly, swirling the tea in my cup. "I think I'm finally living my life for me, Ethan. For the first time in a long time. But peace rarely comes without echoes." It happened one afternoon, just as I was finishing up a meeting with a patient's family. I walked out into the main corridor, paperwork in hand, when I saw her. Samantha. She stood at the far end of the hallway, her white coat neatly pressed, a stethoscope looped around her neck. For a moment, she didn't notice me. She was speaking to another doctor, nodding briskly, her expression focused, professional. But then she turned, and our eyes met. The world seemed to narrow, the hallway suddenly too quiet, the background blur of footsteps and conversation fading into nothing. I braced myself for the sting, for the anger, the coldness, the accusations I'd grown used to. But instead, something unexpected flickered across her face. Not hostility, not resentment. Just exhaustion. She walked toward me slowly, her steps measured, stopping a few feet away. "Dad," she said softly. The word small, careful, as though testing its weight after too long. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Samantha." For a moment we simply stood there, silent, the air between us thick with everything left unsaid. Finally she drew in a shaky breath. "I wanted to tell you about the scholarship." Her voice was even, but her hands trembled slightly where they rested at her sides. "It's a good thing. It's the right thing. I didn't say that before." Her gaze faltered, dropping to the polished tile floor before rising again. "I've been angry," she admitted, the words quiet but steady. "Angry at you. Angry at myself. Angry at everything I thought I deserved." I studied her face, taking in the tired lines around her eyes, the heaviness in her shoulders, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. She wasn't my enemy. She was my daughter, flawed and hurting just as I was. "You don't have to explain," I said gently. "I know." Her jaw clenched, as though holding back words she wasn't ready to release. And then finally she nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before whispering, "I'm not ready to fix this yet." I felt the ache settle deeper in my chest, but there was no bitterness in it this time. I nodded slowly. "That's okay," I said softly. "Take your time." Her eyes searched mine for a long moment, and for the first time in years I saw no accusation there, no calculated defense, only something fragile, something human. Then a pager buzzed at her hip, breaking the moment. She glanced down, adjusted her coat, and gave a small nod before turning to walk away. I watched her disappear into the swirl of the hospital corridors, feeling the weight of the exchange press against me, heavy and light all at once. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning. That evening, Ethan came by after his classes, dropping his bag on the couch. He noticed my silence as I set 2 mugs of tea on the table. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked gently. I nodded, my lips pressing together briefly before I said, "We spoke, just a little." He hesitated, searching my face, then smiled faintly. "That's something," he said quietly. Later that night, after Ethan had gone, I stood by the window, the city lights glittering like constellations below. For months, I'd carried the weight of resentment, anger, guilt, but standing there, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a thread finally untangling. Samantha and I might never return to the father-daughter bond I once imagined, but maybe that was never the point. Some relationships aren't meant to be restored to what they were. Some are meant to be remade into something new, imperfect but honest. For 70 years, I had given myself away to everyone but me. I had measured my worth in sacrifices, my love in financial rescues, my identity in what I could provide. But now, as the city lights stretched endlessly ahead, I understood something simple and profound. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need permission to be whole. For the first time in decades, I was living on my own terms. And for the first time, that was enough. 3 years later, the city felt different, though maybe it was me who had changed. Boston Memorial's courtyard had filled with younger faces, eager voices, and new energy that pulsed through its halls. I stood at the edge of the main lobby, watching a group of nursing students gather around a bulletin board where the names of this year's scholarship recipients had just been posted. The Andrew Miller Nursing Endowment had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Dozens of students from low-income backgrounds were now walking the same halls I once did, their scrubs crisp, their eyes bright with possibility. Every time one of them stopped me to say thank you, I felt the strange mix of humility and quiet pride settle deeper into my bones. This not money, not control, not obligation, this was my legacy. Life had slowed in ways I had learned to appreciate. I worked less now, mostly mentoring young advocates, and occasionally sitting in on hospital committee meetings, but my mornings were mine again. I took long walks along the Charles, unhurried, feeling the weight in my chest that had once seemed permanent slowly give way to something lighter. Ethan graduated that spring. I sat in the crowded auditorium, his name called over the speakers, watching him cross the stage with a confidence I wished I'd carried at his age. When he spotted me in the audience, his grin widened, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the boy who used to fish off the docks with me on summer afternoons, unburdened by family politics or expectations. That night over dinner, he told me about his plans to start graduate school in clinical psychology. "I want to work with families," he said quietly, almost shyly. "Help people untangle the things they can't talk about." I smiled, the weight of his words resting gently in my chest. "You're already better at it than most professionals I know," I told him, meaning every word. I didn't expect to see Samantha that day, but life has a way of circling back when you least prepare for it. It happened one late afternoon in autumn, the hospital courtyard golden under falling leaves. I had just finished a mentorship session when I turned a corner and saw her sitting alone on a bench, her white coat folded neatly beside her, her hands clasped together in her lap. Her posture was different now, less rigid, her face softer somehow, though the lines around her eyes were deeper, carved by years I hadn't been part of. When she noticed me, she hesitated, as if deciding whether to leave. But then she stayed, waiting. I walked toward her slowly, the crisp air biting gently at my skin. "Samantha," I said softly. She looked up, her expression unreadable at first. Then something shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, but something that resembled peace. "Dad," she replied, her voice quiet, steady. We sat in silence for a long moment, the sounds of distant traffic and muffled laughter drifting around us. Finally, she spoke. "I saw the list of scholarship recipients," she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. "You're changing lives." I shook my head gently. "They're changing their own," I said. "I'm just helping them start." She nodded slowly, her throat working as though she were swallowing words she wasn't ready to say. Then, after a pause, she whispered, "I'm proud of you." The words were fragile, hesitant, but they landed like a quiet chord in a long-forgotten song. I didn't reach for her hand, and she didn't reach for mine. We didn't talk about the past or the wounds we'd both carved into each other. But in that moment, under the soft glow of the fading day, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's not one apology or one embrace. It's time. It's showing up. It's choosing to stand in the same space without letting the weight of yesterday crush you. When she stood to leave, she gave me a small nod, and I returned it. No promises, no declarations, just an understanding that the door was no longer locked. That evening, I walked home through the city streets, the cool wind brushing against my face, carrying with it the hum of life moving forward. For 70 years I had measured my worth in sacrifices made and love given away, often to those who couldn't hold it. But standing there, feeling the soft rhythm of my own breath, I finally understood. My worth had never been tied to what I gave, but to who I was, a man who endured, who rebuilt, who learned, at last, to live for himself. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix everything. Some stories aren't meant to end in perfection. Some are meant to end in peace. A year had passed since that autumn afternoon in the hospital courtyard, the day Samantha sat beside me in silence and told me, for the first time in years, that she was proud of me. Life had found a new rhythm since then, a gentler pace I'd never thought possible. Boston's seasons moved steadily. The Charles froze and thawed and froze again, and somewhere along the way the sharp edges of the past began to soften. The Andrew Miller Nursing Endowment had grown faster than I ever imagined. Donors from across the city contributed, inspired by the stories of the first graduating class of nurses who had built careers because of the fund. Some wrote me letters, pages filled with gratitude and dreams, stories of parents working night shifts and children believing for the first time that their lives could be bigger than their circumstances. I kept those letters in a wooden box in my apartment, reading them on quiet mornings when the weight of my history threatened to creep back in. Ethan had just finished his first year of graduate school and stopped by more often than ever, his conversations deeper now, his voice steadier, his questions sharper. One evening, as we sat on the balcony drinking tea under the faint city lights, he asked softly, "Do you think Mom will ever forgive you?" I let the words linger in the cool air before answering. "I don't think forgiveness works like that, Ethan. It's not a destination, it's something we circle around. Some days we're close, other days we drift. And maybe that's okay." He nodded slowly, processing, his brow furrowed in thought. A few weeks later, on a crisp spring morning, Samantha called. It wasn't expected. Her number still startled me when it lit up the screen, but her voice was calm, even deliberate. "Dad," she said softly, "Ethan's birthday is next weekend. I was thinking, maybe we could do something. Together." For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I managed. "I'd like that. We met at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river, a place Samantha chose for its simplicity. Ethan arrived first, grinning when he saw me, clapping a hand on my shoulder as though no time had passed at all. Samantha came moments later, a little breathless, her coat draped over her arm, her eyes darting briefly to mine before settling on her son. It felt fragile at first, the three of us sitting there, the weight of years pressing down around the edges of small talk and cautious smiles. But then, over dinner, something unexpected happened. Ethan began sharing stories from school, the difficult families he worked with, the moments when he thought he'd failed, and the breakthroughs that reminded him why he chose this path. He spoke about listening without judgment, about meeting people where they are instead of where we want them to be. Samantha listened quietly at first, her fork turning slowly in her hand, but eventually she started asking questions. And when Ethan finished describing a case that left him shaken, she reached over and touched his hand gently, her voice soft. "I'm proud of you, Ethan." I watched them, my daughter and my grandson, and felt something inside me shift, not forgiveness, not closure, but a flicker of something I hadn't let myself hope for. Connection. After dinner, we walked together along the riverbank. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming lilacs, and the city lights danced softly across the water. Samantha walked beside me, silent for a long while, before finally saying, almost reluctantly, "I thought you hated me." The words stopped me, simple but heavy, and I turned to her, seeing the rawness in her expression, the vulnerability carefully hidden beneath years of distance. "I never hated you," I said gently. "I hated what we became." "Oh." She nodded slowly, looking out over the water, her shoulders lifting and falling with a quiet breath. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "You don't have to fix it," I said softly. "We just have to keep showing up." For the first time in years, Samantha smiled, small, tentative, but real. And in that moment, under the soft spill of lamplight and the quiet hum of the river, I felt the weight I'd carried for so long begin to ease. We weren't healed. We weren't whole. But we were no longer broken beyond repair. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I thought about the man I used to be, the one crawling across the bedroom floor, desperate for help that never came. That man had been consumed by sacrifice, by love without boundaries, by the belief that giving everything would be enough to hold a family together. But the man walking along the river now understood something simpler, harder, truer. You can't save people by losing yourself. I looked up at the Boston skyline, the city lights scattering like constellations, and for the first time in decades, I felt steady, not because the wounds were gone, but because I'd learned how to carry them. And maybe that was enough. 2 more years passed, and Boston had shifted once again. The city seemed quieter somehow, or maybe it was me, learning to move at a slower, steadier pace. My days at Boston Memorial had changed too. I no longer worked regular hours. I'd stepped back from my position in patient advocacy to focus on mentoring scholarship recipients, helping them navigate both the hospital and the weight of their own ambitions. Watching these students, bright, determined, carrying stories of resilience etched into their bones, reminded me why I'd built the endowment in the first place. It was never about the money. It was about rewriting cycles. Ethan was almost finished with his graduate program, now splitting his time between clinical work and research. One evening, he stopped by my apartment, setting down a stack of papers with the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from finally finding your place in the world. "I got offered a position," he said simply, his voice steady, but his eyes carrying a flicker of nervous excitement. "Trauma therapy. At the hospital." I felt something warm bloom in my chest as I smiled, nodding slowly. "You're going to help people in ways I couldn't," I said softly, meaning it. He hesitated, as though weighing whether to say the next part, and then added, "Mom knows too. She's proud of me." There was a pause, and then, almost as an afterthought, "She talks about you sometimes." I looked up at him, caught off guard. "She does?" He nodded. "Not a lot, but not the way she used to. It's softer now." Those words settled in me like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward slowly. For so long, I had carried the sharp edges of our conflict, believing they defined us. But now, I began to wonder if maybe, in quiet ways, we were both trying to let them go. 2 weeks later, I found out. Samantha called on a Sunday afternoon. Her voice was careful, controlled, but softer than I remembered. "Dad," she began, hesitating slightly on the word, "Ethan invited me over next weekend, for dinner. At your place." For a moment, the air in the room felt heavier, though not unpleasant. "If that's what he wants," I said gently, "then yes, I'd like that." The following Saturday, the table was set simply, 2 candles lit, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filling the apartment. Ethan had insisted on cooking, claiming it was his way of keeping us from arguing, though his grin suggested he didn't entirely believe his own joke. Samantha arrived exactly on time. When I opened the door, I noticed the small shifts, first her shoulders less rigid, her eyes softer, her smile hesitant but real. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. Dinner was slow, the conversation careful, but for the first time in years, it wasn't exhausting. We spoke about Ethan's research, the scholarship recipients, even small memories from years ago when laughter came more easily between us. And then, just as Ethan stepped into the kitchen to grab dessert, Samantha turned to me, her voice quieter, almost fragile. "I need to say something," she began, fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "Not because it fixes anything. I need you to know." She hesitated, drawing in a deep, uneven breath before continuing. "I was angry for so long. Angry at you, angry at myself. Angry that I felt like I could never measure up, and instead of talking about it, I took from you. I kept taking because it felt easier than admitting I was scared. I thought I deserved everything you gave me, but I never stopped to think about what it cost you." Her voice cracked on the last sentence. and I sat in silence, letting her words fill the space between us. For years I had dreamed of hearing some version of this. Imagined apologies delivered perfectly, neatly tied with a bow. But in reality, it wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. It was raw, imperfect, human. I leaned back slightly, my voice quiet when I finally spoke. I wasn't innocent either, Samantha. I thought giving would keep us close, that sacrificing myself was the same thing as loving you. I should have taught you how to stand on your own instead of making you believe I'd always catch you. That's on me. She blinked rapidly, and for the first time in years, I saw her lower her defenses, just for a moment. I don't know if I can undo everything, she whispered. You don't have to, I said softly. We just have to stop carrying it like it defines us. Ethan returned then, balancing plates awkwardly, oblivious to the weight of what had just passed between us. The conversation shifted to lighter things, but beneath it ran something deeper. Unspoken, the understanding that something fragile had shifted tonight, quietly, permanently. Later, after they left, I sat by the window, watching the city lights scatter across the river. The apartment felt warmer somehow, as though the air itself had softened. The wounds weren't healed, not entirely, but they were no longer festering in silence. For so many years I had lived defined by what I had lost: control, trust, connection. But now, for the first time, I felt defined by what remained, by what we were still building, however slowly, however imperfectly. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was no longer war. And sometimes, that's enough. On the morning of my 75th birthday, I sat by the window of my apartment, the spring light spilling across the worn oak floor, and began writing a letter to Ethan. The city outside hummed softly, alive but unhurried, and for the first time in decades, so was I. My hand moved slowly, deliberately, as I put into words what years of silence and mistakes had taught me. I told him that love without boundaries isn't love at all, that giving everything without teaching someone how to stand will break them as surely as it breaks you. I told him that forgiveness isn't a single act, but a choice we make, again and again, until the weight of resentment no longer defines us. Halfway through, my phone buzzed Samantha's name on the screen. She rarely called early, and for a moment my chest tightened. When I answered, her voice was soft, almost tentative. "Happy birthday, Dad," she said. There was a pause, a breath, then, "I was thinking, maybe dinner tonight? Just us." I didn't hesitate. "I'd like that," I replied, and the words felt lighter than they ever had. As I set the phone down, I looked back at the unfinished letter, the words waiting patiently for me to continue. I realized then that this was what rebuilding looked like, not grand gestures, not sweeping reconciliations, but small, steady moments where we chose to stay, to listen, to try. I picked up my pen again, smiling faintly as I wrote the last line. "Ethan, the greatest gift we give isn't what we leave behind. It's the love we choose while we're still here." And for the first time, I felt free. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today and being part of this journey. Stories like this remind us that healing, forgiveness, and second chances are never simple, but they are always possible. If you found yourself moved by Andrew's story, if it made you pause and reflect on your own relationships, we'd love to have you as part of our growing community. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We truly read and value every single one. Your support allows us to keep sharing more stories that matter, stories that stay with you long after they end. Until next time, take care of yourself and of the ones you love.